Identifying, nurturing, and retaining entrepreneurs. This morning on For the Record. Good morning, I'm Neil Heinen. Entrepreneurism is a big word, and it's been around for a long time. This country was built on entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurism has special currency today in the globally competitive marketplace. Yet it remains a daunting idea for some and a bit of a mystery to some others, both of which the annual Wisconsin Entrepreneurs Conference seeks to remedy. It's being held at the Marriott West this Tuesday and Wednesday, and joining me this morning to talk about all things entrepreneurial are Tom Still, president of conference sponsor, the Wisconsin Technology Council, attorney Melissa Terzin, co-chair of the Venture Best team at the law firm of Michael Best and Friedrich, and also co-chair of this year's conference, and Mark Gehrig, co-founder and president of Asmapolis, which develops sensors and mobile apps used to better manage asthma. In other words, he's our flesh and blood entrepreneur on the panel. And thank you all very much for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Neil.
Tom, as I mentioned, entrepreneurs. Henry Ford was an entrepreneur. We can list all of the entrepreneurs in our history, and yet for some reason, and acknowledging the importance that we put on it today, I think it still has this really big kind of daunting impression for a lot of people. Talk about entrepreneurs in terms of the conference. Sure. Who are they? What do they look like? And what's the role of the conference?
Yeah, well, entrepreneurism is a big concept for many, but just basically think of it as starting and operating your own business, just to get it down to some basic concepts. And there really are different types of entrepreneurs. There are the mom and pop entrepreneurs, what I might call social entrepreneurs, lifestyle businesses that start up around that, but then also the gazelles, companies that are really set out to grow and grow quickly. I think Asmapolis is a good example of those are the types of companies that we really want to encourage, attract, retain, and send them down the path to prosperity. And that's what the conference aims to do, along with many other things that we do throughout the year. But the conference is focused on trying to talk about best practices, getting new entrepreneurs engaged. They can learn from more seasoned entrepreneurs, and just really go through a lot of the kind of blocking and tackling that it takes to start a business.
As helpful as it is to make it simple and understandable to people, however, we can't overestimate its importance right now. I mean, just in terms of job growth, I mean, entrepreneurism's the game.
It is the game. The Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City, which takes a look at all things entrepreneurial around the country, did a study a couple of years ago that showed that all net new jobs in the United States are produced by young companies that are 5 years old or younger. Big companies, of course, produce jobs, but some of them shed jobs as well, just during that process of creative destruction. And so where the real activity takes place is with those young companies. That's where the job creation is taking place, and that's where Wisconsin needs to do a better job overall.
Yeah. If we get a chance, I would like to, at some point in the show, maybe talk a little bit about what the UW did with a pretty significant Kauffman grant that included entrepreneurism on campus.
Right.
But I want to talk, Melissa, just expand this a little bit. The idea that there is that there's a field of law, that's sort of important in this conversation is pretty significant. Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting because it really is a specialized practice, and there's a lot of, I think, general business attorneys that play in a lot, but there actually is a core of us here in Madison and Milwaukee that really focus on working with these entrepreneurs from the early stage of how do they want to be incorporated, what state do they want to incorporate in, to working with them to bring on employees. We need to talk about different contractual agreements, non-competes for their employees. If they have intellectual property, we need to make sure that the company is retaining those rights. And then all the way up, we work with these companies to get financing and anything beyond that. Hopefully they'll get big enough, like Tom said, and we'll have to help them, sell their company or an IPO, which isn't as frequent these days. But there's a lot that goes into these companies, and really the thing that I think is different about my practice is we have to kind of do things on the fly. These companies that we're talking about move so quickly, And Mark can't call me and say, hey, I need this answer from you in 2 weeks in a 10-page memo. I mean, they just move too quick for that. So you really have to be comfortable just kind of shooting from the hip and helping give business advice. And here's the risks to think about, but at the end of the day, it's the entrepreneur's call.
So the pace of the work appeals to you.
Pace of the work is
And
great.
I would assume that there's something about the personalities of entrepreneurs at this stage, because at some
Absolutely.
point they're going to become successful and you're going to pass them on to a whole different branch of the firm.
Right.
But at this point,
Yeah, it's all about relationships and kind of counseling them. I think, not in a bad way, but I would say most entrepreneurs are quirky in some sort of way, and they're great. We've seen a real influx lately of young entrepreneurs, people in their 20s, who are doing this for the very first time, and they're great on the IT or the software, but they really don't have the business sense, or they're going to be talking to an investor and they don't understand what the questions they are going to get from those investors. So there's a lot of counseling and helping really first-time entrepreneurs navigate these waters.
so have we described you, Mark? Is it?
Yeah, not the young part, though. Quirky, probably.
Quirky, maybe.
I'll just throw in that the accountants and the law firm are very important to an early company. That's how our initial companies met investors. That's how we figured out how to structure ourselves, what to do. It's just been, I can't overstress the importance of a good law firm in helping guide the company early on and help them to form and hire the right people and raise money.
So you had this idea for an app for online tools that would help people with asthma. What determined your thinking in terms of how that business would be born, develop, grow, that makes it entrepreneurial, rather than starting a small business?
Yeah, well, there's a co-founder, David Van Sickle. He's a PhD asthma epidemiologist. He spent his career in asthma and was frustrated by the lack of data. They would at CDC do asthma outbreak investigations with no data on what might be triggering that in a community. So it was his concept to attach sensors to medication inhalers and track where asthma events are occurring in the community. And the primary effect is to track how the individual patient is doing. The frequency of use of that inhaler is the clinical measure of how the patient is doing. So we're directly measuring how that patient is doing and can provide feedback to get the patient under control.
Did you bring something along?
I did. I've got I don't know if you can zoom in. But the blue is an asthma inhaler.
Right,
and that's our
looks kind of
sensor.
familiar for people.
Yep, this is actually a controller, a daily controller medication. But it also can be a rescue medication. This sensor tracks when the inhaler is used. It transmits through an iPhone or an Android phone or a home base station the time and location when that inhaler was used.
Yeah. I'm thinking about young people and the role of entrepreneurism. How much of this is driven by the economy of the 21st century, Tom, and the lack of sort of traditional jobs that may have been lost?
Sure.
That now entrepreneurism becomes an even more important focus point.
Sure. A lot of it is driven by the current economy, just the overall competitiveness of the global economy, the notion that new companies are going to rise up and sort of push out the old as they're displacing other things in the marketplace or creating entirely new marketplaces that didn't exist before. Now, I don't want to suggest that entrepreneurism is altogether new. I mean, if you look at Wisconsin's history, names like Harley, Davidson, Johnson, Quadracci, these are real people who were entrepreneurs in Wisconsin's past and built some of the biggest companies that we have in the state today. We're going through a rebirth of that, I think, is what happened. For a while, I think Wisconsin was coasting along, to be honest, in a couple of major sectors where things were rolling along pretty well, but then we lost about 150,000 manufacturing jobs in 10 years or less. That meant that there had to be some new opportunities. And entrepreneurs are filling that void. They're creating these new companies that are rising up, creating jobs, and really adding to the economy in very direct ways.
When we come back, let's talk the specifics about the conference and tell people what they might expect at the Entrepreneurs Conference. Ready for this?
Good.
So the 2013 Wisconsin Entrepreneurs Conference is coming up this week, Tuesday and Wednesday at the Marriott West. The website's important because you can still register. There's room available to come and learn about entrepreneurism in Wisconsin. Resources available. Hear from other entrepreneurs and from speakers. It's a full day, Tom. There's a lot going on, including the 2 days. I'm sorry, 2 days, including the finalists in the Governor's Business Plan Contest, which is always a big deal. And maybe you could just start there.
Oh, sure. We have what's called our Diligent Dozen. These are traditionally the last 12 survivors out of, in this year, 326 initial entries in the business plan contest. Actually, technically, it's a baker's dozen because we had a tie, so there are 13. So, but that's where we're going to hear from them, and then the winners of the contest. That's day one. Day two, we'll announce who won it. So that's one of the elements. We've got a lot of great speakers coming in. One of note, Jason Lukash, who started Orig Audio. Yep. He was Entrepreneur Magazine's Emerging Entrepreneur of the Year in 2012. He was on the Shark Tank show, which, you know, he rather than get hooted off, he actually got an investment out of it. We're bringing in a bunch of folks from California who are all UW-Madison grads, mostly in engineering and computer science, to talk about their experiences in the Silicon Valley. They're all successful investors or entrepreneurs now, and do a little bit of a compare and contrast. And I think their overall message is going to be build on what you have. Don't try to be us in the Silicon Valley.
Yeah, right.
We have 15 different panel discussions. Melissa and Mark are both on different panels during that array, and it's all around the what we think are three stages for entrepreneurs: launch, grow, and succeed. And so a lot of best practices, talk about successes, and in some cases what people learn from failure, which is very important for entrepreneurs as well. So there are a lot of moving parts, but those are some of the specifics.
As co-chairs, Melissa, does every year, I mean, is there like a theme that you think is important, particularly relevant in a particular year?
Yep, it is. This year's back to basics, and so a lot of our messaging that's gone out has sort of gears on it with the launch, grow, succeed track. But it's kind of focused on, you know, let's sort of take a refresh. Let's look at where we are, and let's sort of see what's missing, and hopefully, you know, bring some more of that in. And I think it's going to be great to have the Silicon Valley Badgers come back. I was out in California in January, and I think it's going to be some fresh energy, and just to get the Wisconsin community involved in what they're doing and hear about what really goes on out in California. I think it's going to be a little bit of an eye-opener.
And you know what's interesting for them is they see opportunities here. All of them really at one level or another are investors now. And they know that there are some really interesting things happening. Asmapolis is, again, a good example. And so I think they want to be back here to kind of poke around and kick some tires as well.
Yeah. Clearly, your experience will be valuable, Mark, but what will you be looking for?
Well, I'm on a panel, Closing Your First Sale, with Matt Yonkel from Murphy Music and Mark Wilson from TermSync and Remus. Who can say Remus's last name?
Point of Vision. Yeah.
From Sonic Foundry and now Row Wheels. So that's, I think the presentations are great, the panels are great, but for me it's about networking. It's just everyone in town. There's lots of familiar faces. So for a new entrepreneur, there's not a better place to meet investors, service providers, other tech company founders. The networking is just great. And there's an event the night before at Death Store Distillery. I happen to be on the board of Death Store. That's an amazing distillery, an amazing place, so that'll be a great opportunity to meet people.
That's right.
Give us an idea of numbers, Mark. I'm sure for everybody it's different, but give us a rough ballpark of how much money entrepreneurs need to really get a decent start.
Yeah, well, we've got about 20 employees currently, so that's substantial annual cost just to support that number of employees.
Right.
We just closed a $5 million Series A round from a firm called Social Capital Partnership in Palo Alto. We had 2 previous rounds of financing, so it's substantial. But there are all kinds of opportunities today. There's Generator, the incubator program. It doesn't the good thing today is it doesn't require as much money as it used to develop a product, test it out, get an app on the iPhone. Or I wouldn't say it requires massive amounts of money to get going, Once you've got the concept and you think it's going to do well, I think it makes sense to invest and spend the money you need to really make it a success.
Do you know where some of that potential money is, Melissa, or is that not outside of your scope of services?
In terms of the investors?
Yeah, and would a client, you know, would you be
Absolutely.
able to say to a client, here's a place you might want to consider?
Yeah, we same thing as Mark. I mean, there's these are two big conferences a year. There's the one that we're having on Tuesday, and then we have its kind of sister conference in November,
Right.
The early stage symposium. And same thing. I mean, we also happen to work with the investors who invest in these companies. So, you know, not only do we have access and relationships with investors in, you know, some of our other companies, we know the guys out at Social Plus Capital, but then we also work with a number of investors as well. So we know, you know, what their niche is, what area and market they like to see, and we can at least make those introductions and kind of funnel some of our companies to, hey, this might be interesting to what you guys are investing in. You should take a look.
Sure. You made some specific feelings about this, but are you addressing issues like crowdfunding and Kickstarter and that kind of stuff?
There's a specific panel on crowdfunding during the conference, so people can learn the latest about the rules surrounding that, or the lack of rules surrounding that.
Right.
More
Still waiting.
specifically,
We're in a
still
holding
waiting.
pattern.
Rules in development.
Right. As Melissa indicated, there are a number of investors who will be at the conference. And of course, part of the Tech Council is the Wisconsin Angel Network.
Right.
And we're in touch with angel investors throughout the state. But, you know, I think as Mark's experience really suggests, there's a need for more early stage capital in Wisconsin. I think he's predominantly raised his capital outside the state. But you know, coming up a day after the conference, the state assembly is going to vote on an early stage capital bill that I hope is passed, and I hope that becomes a part of the fabric around here and helps kickstart the kind of investment capital that we need.
Really would be the first big message that the state has sent out in competing with other states that have, a lot of whom have beat us to the punch.
Exactly. You can go back in time not too long ago, and there were the investor tax credits predominantly aimed at angels, and those worked really well. But now we need something to sort of take us to the next level.
Yep. All right, we're going to come back, continue to talk about the 2013 Wisconsin Entrepreneurs Conference. You can register for this week's 2013 Wisconsin Entrepreneurs Conference at WITREPSconference.com. It's on your screen. It's at the Marriott West this Tuesday and Wednesday.
That's TREPS. That's a short word for entrepreneur.
TREPS. Thank you.
We're being too clever.
Tom Stills, the president of the Wisconsin Technology Council, putting on the conference. Melissa Terzin, who is a member of the co-chair of the Venture Best team at Michael Best and Friedrich, and co-chair of the conference, and Mark Gehrig, who is the co-founder of Asmapolis, and Mark is going to be on one of the panels and has helped put this company together. So, anything we're missing on the agenda for the 2 days, Tom, that would help people decide?
Well, Mark and Melissa both touched on this, but there's a lot of networking opportunities. And, you know, entrepreneurs sometimes, if there's a blind side, it's that they're kind of head down on the lab bench or head down in their company, and they don't come up for air. And they're not necessarily out always meeting with others. Right. And it can be something of a lonely experience unless you are out there networking. And that's a way to find, you know, other contacts, whether they be on the service side, the investor side, or just other entrepreneurs. So those are some aspects about the conference that really take place in a very fluid sort of way throughout both days.
You know, it's interesting. You and I talked about this, I'm sure, 15 years ago. But the idea that there was a gap. There was a lack of business support for scientists and researchers who wanted to take their products to market. Do you have any sense that we're doing better with that? Certainly having a team at Michael Best is a pretty important statement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've also seen a lot recently of a lot of the IT coming out. So not just, you know, Madison, I think historically has been biotech with the university and with WARF and all the great work they do. But even, I think there's a lot of crossover. Just being an entrepreneur in general, no matter what industry you're in, you can learn a lot from somebody in the biotech side if you're not a biotech entrepreneur. I mean, I think the great thing that I found about just the entrepreneurial environment as a whole is everybody is really willing to help. And I think there's really a sense of paying it forward. I think, if you ask Mark, he can give examples of people that helped him get to where he is. And I think he does a lot now with kind of entrepreneurs who haven't done it before to help get them to the same spot.
Well, let me ask that question, but in a different way, Mark, because we angst about this a lot. Why do you stay here?
Well, I mean, I think that's a great environment, right? You've got UW, you've got a steady stream of smart people coming out. You've got Epic attracting a stream of smart people. And we think it's just a great city to live in and work in. Much different than, say, Silicon Valley, where there's it's more frenetic. There are people jumping around company to company. I think people are more loyal to the companies. So we think it's a great place to run a company. There are issues, right? It is harder to raise money here. It's harder to recruit engineers here for us. But we think it's a great place to work. And going back, there's so many resources. There's Merlin Mentors, there's Capital Entrepreneurs, Accelerate Madison. There are meetups pretty much every week on different topics. There's so much opportunity to connect to other people in Madison that I think it's great.
It's a sense of maturity, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah, it really is. If you go back even a dozen or so years, there was no Entrepreneurs Conference.
Right.
There was no Wisconsin Angel Network.
Right.
There are a lot of things that have really come up in the environment here that has made it much more hospitable to entrepreneurs and investors as well.
What'd you say, 300 plus applicants for the business contest?
Yeah, we had 326 this year on the first round applications, and those
Sounds like a pretty good number.
That's statewide.
Yeah.
That's statewide. That was from more than 100 different communities. So it's not just Madison.
Right.
It's happening everywhere, which is really good. And this is the 10th annual business plan contest, and there are a number of success stories that have come out of it.
We didn't get a chance to get into UW, and we'll have to save that for another show. But the
Sure.
idea that the Kauffman Grant, that whole topic of entrepreneurship, was injected into the university,
Yep.
including the law school in a lot of interesting ways, I think says something about entrepreneurship.
Absolutely.
Okay, have a great conference. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Neil.
We're going to come back and wrap up For the Record right after this. My thanks to Tom, Melissa, and Mark for being here today. Next week, local politics from a young female perspective with former Madison City Alder Bridget Maniaci. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Sunday.